Serena knew exactly what she was doing. That is the part nobody wants to say out loud. She was not confused. She was not some naive woman who stumbled into an affair without realizing where she was going. She was not manipulated from the beginning. She was not a victim of circumstance. She made a choice. Eyes open, heart racing, fully aware. She chose Solomon. She chose him over dinner on a rainy Wednesday when Raymond was somewhere in another city being important. She chose him over wine she did not need but poured anyway. She chose him over long phone calls that went past midnight, lying in the dark of a bedroom that had felt like a stranger's room for years. She chose him every time he called, every time he showed up, every time he looked at her like she was the most interesting person in the room. And she believed it, because she needed to. And then one night, one quiet, completely unremarkable Tuesday night, Solomon asked her a question. Not about her feelings, not about their future, not about the marriage she was quietly dismantling, about Raymond. That was the moment the whole story changed. She did not know it yet. But we do. Stay with me. Because what happens next is the kind of thing people are talking about right now. The kind of story that keeps you up at night wondering, could I have done the same thing? Would I have, and what would I have lost if I did? Hey friends, welcome to the channel. Before we continue, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss more powerful stories like this. And I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Are you watching from the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, Jamaica, South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, or somewhere else entirely? It's always amazing to see just how far these stories travel around the world. There is a marriage that looks perfect, you know the one. Beautiful house, expensive car, husband who commands every room, wife who looks like she has it all figured out. The photos are stunning. The life looks exactly like what everyone else is working toward. And behind that front door, silence. Not the peaceful kind, the heavy kind, the kind that has weight. The kind that builds up so slowly you don't notice it until one morning you're walking from the bedroom to the kitchen and you have to go around it just to get there. One missed conversation, one canceled dinner. One night lying next to someone and realizing you cannot remember the last time they asked how you were actually doing. That was Raymond and Serena. 16 years of a marriage that looked like a dream from the outside and felt like a museum on the inside. Nobody looking at them would have guessed it for even 1 second. That is the most dangerous kind of marriage, because the person inside it starts to disappear, quietly, slowly, without anyone noticing. And one day someone notices. Just not the right someone. Raymond was 51 years old. A large, broad-shouldered man with very dark skin, close-cropped silver hair at his temples, and the kind of posture that came from never once in his adult life having to apologize for taking up space. He walked into rooms, and people noticed. He spoke, and conversations shifted in his direction. He had built, or rather inherited, and then expertly expanded, one of the most quietly powerful private real estate portfolios in the country. Quietly powerful. Hold that phrase. It matters more than you know right now. Serena was 44. The kind of woman who made strangers look twice and then feel slightly embarrassed for it. Dark-skinned, sharp-eyed, with a warmth she showed only to people she actually trusted, which by the time this story begins had become a very short list. She was funny in private. Genuinely, disarmingly funny. She was also strategically brilliant at her work, fiercely loyal to her small circle of friends, and deeply, quietly exhausted by a marriage that had somewhere along the way stopped being a marriage and started being a performance. She was not dependent on Raymond. She had her own income, her own career, her own standing. She was lonely. And there is a universe of difference between those two things. 16 years. That is how long they had been married. 16 years of building something that looked from the outside like a life worth envying. And somewhere around year 11, nobody could point to an exact moment, not even Serena. The performance became the whole thing. The warmth dried up. The conversations became logistics. The bed became a place they both slept and nothing more. So when Solomon walked in, she was ready in the way that only someone who has been starving for a long time is ready for a meal. She did not know it was going to cost her everything. To understand what Serena eventually sold, you have to understand what Raymond was protecting. And to understand what Raymond was protecting, you have to go back further than Raymond. You have to go back to his father. Gerald Holt was born in 1938 and died in 2003. In the 65 years between those two events, Gerald became a wealthy man, a respected man, a man whose name appeared on the boards of charitable organizations, and whose face appeared in the social pages of regional newspapers at least twice a year. Gerald was not a good man. He was a successful one. And as I said before, those are not the same thing. The difference between a good man and a successful one is sometimes everything. Starting in the 1960s, Gerald built his fortune through a very specific and very deliberate method. He targeted rural communities. Communities that were poor, largely undereducated, and had no access to meaningful legal representation. Communities where the residents were black families who had worked that land for generations, through sharecropping, through inheritance, through sheer survival, but whose legal ownership of it was complicated, disputed, or insufficiently documented. Gerald arrived in these communities with a briefcase, a suit, and a small team of lawyers. He brought documents that looked official. He brought patience. He brought offers that seemed reasonable to people who had no way of knowing what the land was actually worth. Sometimes he used pressure. Sometimes he used confusion. Sometimes he found local officials who were willing to assist in ways they should not have been. Sometimes he simply waited for families to fall into debt and then arrived at the most vulnerable possible moment. Gerald Holt stole from people who had no way to fight back. And he called it business. Farming families, elderly couples who had raised their children on that land, communities that had survived everything history threw at them, and then lost their land to a man with a briefcase and the right connections. Gerald took all of it, developed it, built on it, sold it, reinvested the proceeds, built again. The portfolio grew across 3 decades. Quietly, steadily, generation by generation, until it was worth more than anyone looking at it from the outside could easily calculate. By the time Raymond was born, Gerald Holt was a philanthropist, a church donor, a man whose name was on buildings, a man who was genuinely admired by people who had no idea. Raymond grew up inside that wealth. The best schools, international travel, a life completely insulated from want of any kind. He had no reason to ask questions about where it came from. Nobody told him to. Then Raymond turned 26. His father called him into his study. Poured 2 glasses of whiskey, good whiskey, the kind Gerald kept for occasions he considered important, sat down, and told his son everything. Not out of guilt, out of preparation. Gerald wanted Raymond to understand what he was about to inherit and what it would take to protect it. He told Raymond the names of the communities, the methods he had used, the officials who had helped, the families who had tried to fight and failed. He told Raymond that the land those families had lost was now worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He told Raymond that some of those families were still alive, elderly now, scattered, and that some of them had never stopped believing they had been wronged. He told Raymond that the only way to protect what they had built was to keep it buried. Raymond listened. He finished his whiskey. He did not speak for a very long time, and then he accepted the inheritance. He told himself it was complicated. He had not done what his father did. He could not undo it. Destroying everything Gerald had built would not give those families their land back. The money was already generational. The damage was already done. He told himself those things on the morning of the day he signed the inheritance documents. He kept telling himself those things every single morning for 25 years. He never spoke about it. Not to business partners, not to friends, not to his legal team, only to Serena. 7 years into their marriage, too much wine, a conversation that started somewhere normal and kept going deeper than either of them intended. Raymond sat in their kitchen at 2 a.m. and told his wife the truth about where everything they had came from. He told her because she was his wife. Because he trusted her completely. Because after 7 years of building a life together, he believed, genuinely believed, that love meant your worst truth was safe in someone else's hands. He was wrong. But not yet. That part comes later. Serena carried that secret for 9 years. 9 years of knowing exactly what the house she lived in was built on. 9 years of attending charity events on Raymond's arm and smiling at people who admired him. 9 years of watching her husband write donation checks and give speeches about community investment and receive awards from organizations whose members had no idea who Gerald Holt actually was. 9 years of not saying a word. She was not a saint. She made her peace with it, the way most people make peace with difficult knowledge that does not immediately affect their daily life, by putting it in a box, closing the lid, and choosing not to open it on most days. She stayed because she loved Raymond. For a long time, she genuinely, deeply loved him. She stayed because the life was good and the reasons to leave were invisible to everyone around her. She stayed because she was not the kind of woman who burned things down without a reason she could point to. Loneliness is not a reason people respect. That does not make it any less real. By year 11, the invisible reasons had become impossible to ignore. The silence in the house had weight. Raymond worked constantly, not because the business required it, Serena suspected, but because being busy was easier than being present. He was a good provider. He was never cruel. He was simply absent from the marriage while still being physically in it. And after enough years, that kind of absence carves out something in a person that does not fill back up on its own. Year 13. A fundraising event. One of those polished, expensive evenings where everyone is performing some version of generosity and everyone's shoes cost more than most people's monthly rent. Serena was there as Raymond's wife. Raymond was working the room. Always working the room, always on, always the version of himself that other people needed. Solomon was there representing a legal advocacy organization, community land rights, historical property disputes, reparative justice for families whose land had been taken through exploitative practices decades ago. Of all the events, of all the rooms, of all the possible people, he was 40 years old, tall, lean, with very dark skin, and the kind of face that looked like it had thought carefully about most things. He listened when Serena spoke. Genuinely listened. The way that people who are actually interested in you listen. Not the way people listen while waiting for their turn to speak. He asked questions that proved he had heard her previous answer. He made her feel like the most interesting person in a room full of people who were all trying to be the most interesting person. They talked for 2 hours. At the end of the night, Raymond found her, put his hand on the small of her back, and steered her toward the exit without once asking how her evening had been. She thought about Solomon the entire drive home. She knew it right then. She just did not let herself say it out loud. 3 weeks later, Solomon found her on LinkedIn. Professional message. Tasteful. An invitation to coffee to discuss a potential collaboration between his organization and a charitable initiative she was involved with. She said yes before she finished reading the message. Coffee became lunch. Lunch became dinner. Dinner became phone calls that stretched past midnight. Somewhere in the second month, Serena stopped lying to herself about what this was. For 8 months she lived 2 lives. Wife in the morning, herself at night. And she told herself the distinction mattered. That this was not really betrayal because the marriage was already gone. Because Raymond had left first even if he had never physically walked out the door. Because everyone deserves to feel alive. She had no idea who Solomon really was. She had no idea why he had found her. And that is the part that breaks everything. Solomon Vance had been building the case for 6 years. 6 years of documentation. Of traveling to rural counties to sit with elderly men and women who still had memory of the day Gerald Holt's team arrived with their paperwork. 6 years of cross-referencing land records, tracing chains of ownership, mapping the progression from stolen farmland to developed property to the Holt estate that Raymond now controlled and expanded. The evidence was real. It was detailed. In many ways it was more comprehensive than anything his organization had ever assembled for a case of this kind. What Solomon did not have was internal acknowledgement. He needed proof that Raymond knew. Not speculation. Not circumstantial reasoning. Proof that the knowledge was deliberate, that the concealment was intentional, that Raymond Holt was not an innocent heir who simply benefited from his father's crimes without knowing their nature, but a man who had been explicitly briefed, who had made a conscious choice to protect what should never have been protected. Without that proof, the case was strong, but not certain. The defense would argue ignorance. They would argue that holding a son responsible for a father he could not control was fundamentally unjust. They would argue it sympathetically, and some of it would land. Solomon had spent 6 years building a case that needed one thing he could not legally obtain. He had heard rumors, sources who suggested Raymond had been briefed by Gerald before his death. But rumors were not evidence, and everyone with direct knowledge was either dead or too afraid. And then he found Serena. Not by accident. Not by fate. By research. He studied her the way he studied everything, methodically, completely, without sentimentality. Her career trajectory, her public presence, the charitable work she did independently of Raymond. The quiet signals, visible to anyone paying close enough attention, of a woman in a marriage that was functional in every external way and privately hollow. He constructed an approach. He found the fundraiser she would attend. He arranged to be there. He knew her face before she knew his name. He told himself it was necessary. He told himself the families he represented had waited long enough. Both of those things were true. Neither of them made what he did clean. The connection was real. That is the part that made it complicated, the part that gave Solomon genuine trouble when he lay awake at 3 a.m. running the calculation again. He was not performing interest. He genuinely liked Serena. Her sharpness, her humor, the way she spoke about things she cared about with a precision that most people reserved for things they were paid to care about. She was not who he had expected when he built his profile of Raymond Holt's wife. She was more. That made it harder. It did not make him stop. For 8 months he was everything Raymond was not. Present, attentive, curious. He let the relationship deepen at its own pace. He let her trust accumulate. He was patient in the way that someone with a long-term objective learns to be patient. And then one Tuesday night, he asked the question he had been building toward since before she knew he existed. He said, "Did Raymond ever talk to you about his father? About how the family actually built what they have?" Serena went completely still. That stillness answered him before she said a single word. And Solomon felt 2 things at exactly the same time. The satisfaction of confirmation, and something colder that he did not have a name for yet. She did not answer that night. She got up, found her shoes, said she had somewhere she needed to be, left without looking back at him. Solomon let her go. He had learned by this point that pressure would cost him everything. He let her leave, and he sat in the quiet of his apartment and waited. She did not call for 4 days. Inside those 4 days, Serena's head was a war. She knew what Solomon's organization did. She had listened to him talk about it for months, about land rights, about historical theft, about the families who had spent decades trying to get someone with resources to take their case seriously. She had listened and felt moved, and thought what a terrible injustice. All while carrying the exact information he needed, like a stone she had learned to walk around. She had known for 9 years, and she had said nothing to anyone. Now the man she was in love with, the man who made her feel like herself for the first time in years, was asking, and the question sat in the room between them like something alive. She told herself she was protecting Raymond. She told herself it was not her secret to tell. She told herself those families, whoever they were, wherever they were, had survived this long without her intervention. She called Solomon on the 5th day. She said, "I need to know why you were asking." And Solomon, to his credit, or perhaps because he understood that she would not respond to anything less, was more honest with her than he had been in 8 months. He told her about the case, about the 6 years of work, about the families, about what they had and what they still needed, about what her knowledge could mean for the outcome. He did not tell her he had targeted her deliberately. He did not tell her that he had been at that fundraiser because of her, not despite her. He told her almost everything. Just not that. And the thing someone does not tell you is sometimes the only thing that matters. She sat with it for another week. She told herself she was thinking carefully. She was. But she was also feeling something she had not felt in a very long time. The sense that she was at a crossroads that was real, that the choice in front of her was one of those rare decisions that would divide her life into before and after. She thought about the families. She thought about Gerald Holt sitting across from his 26-year-old son and handing him knowledge and complicity in the same moment. She thought about Raymond signing those inheritance documents. She thought about 16 years of charity dinners and donations and speeches. She thought about Solomon. And then she told him. She told him about the night in the kitchen. The wine. The hour. The weight she had watched lift from Raymond's shoulders as he finally said it out loud to someone. She gave Solomon the names Gerald had given Raymond. The communities, the methods, the officials involved. She gave him the confirmation he had spent 6 years working toward. She gave it because she believed in what Solomon was fighting for. She gave it because 9 years of carrying it alone had become genuinely unbearable. She gave it because she loved him. All 3 of those things were completely true, and not one of them saved her from what came next. Solomon filed a lawsuit within 3 weeks of that conversation. The lawsuit was a document that had clearly been in preparation for a long time, precise, comprehensive, and devastating in the way that only something built with patience and expertise can be devastating. It named Raymond Holt directly. It connected specific properties in the current Holt portfolio to communities whose land records showed irregular transfer patterns beginning in the 1960s. It included testimony from surviving community members. And it included, anonymized initially but unmistakably specific, a source close to the Holt family who could confirm that Raymond had been explicitly informed of his father's methods prior to accepting the inheritance. It was everything Solomon had needed, and Serena had given him every last piece of it. Raymond found out on a Thursday morning. His lawyer called at 7:45. Raymond was in the kitchen, still in the clothes he had slept in, waiting for coffee to finish. His lawyer's voice was careful in the way that lawyers' voices get careful when the news is not manageable. Raymond listened. He did not speak. He put the phone down on the counter when the call ended and stood in his kitchen for a long time. Serena was upstairs. He thought about the night in the same kitchen. The wine. The relief of finally saying it out loud. The way she had held his hand across the table and not pulled away. He had put his worst truth in her hands. He had believed, had genuinely, completely believed that it was safe there. Raymond Holt had protected that secret for 25 years. His wife had held it for less than 9 before it became a weapon pointed at him. She came downstairs and found him standing there. He placed his phone on the kitchen table between them without saying anything. She looked at the screen. She looked at his face. She looked at the phone again. Raymond said, "Who did you tell?" The silence that followed lasted about 4 seconds. It felt like considerably longer. Serena said nothing, and Raymond, who in 16 years of marriage had never once raised his voice at her, felt something collapse inside his chest that had no name. The case moved fast. Cases involving old money and historical injustice always move fast once they have momentum, because both sides understand that the story itself is already writing the verdict in the court of public opinion long before any judge sees it. Media picked it up within 48 hours of the filing. The Holt name was old enough and respected enough that the story had immediate traction. By the end of the first week, it was everywhere. Historical land theft, generational wealth built on exploitation. Surviving victims in their 70s and 80s going on camera to talk about what Gerald Holt had taken from their families. Old men and women describing the day someone arrived with papers. Describing what they had lost. Describing decades of watching land their grandparents had cleared and farmed become luxury developments worth more money than their entire family had ever seen. And there was Raymond's name, right at the center of all of it. Business partners distanced themselves. Quietly at first. Unreturned calls, meetings that got postponed and never rescheduled. And then publicly. A major development project he had been negotiating for the better part of 2 years collapsed within a fortnight. His name was being said in sentences that also contained the words exploitation, complicity, cover-up, and generational theft. He was not his father. He had not done what Gerald did. But he had known. He had chosen silence. He had signed documents and attended charity events and written donations checks and built a life on a foundation he had chosen not to examine. In 2026, I inherited it and chose not to question it. Is not the defense it used to be. People are done accepting that answer. Serena moved out 12 days after the filing. She did not fight about it. She packed what was clearly hers, which felt like very little, she noticed, when the house and its contents had always been bought with money that now had a specific and devastating history, and went to stay with her sister. She called Solomon that first evening. He answered. They talked for over an hour. Solomon was honest, measured, warm. He told her the case was proceeding, that the families were finally going to get their day, that what she had done, painful as everything around it was, had been the right thing. She asked him where they stood. The two of them. There was a pause on the line. 3 seconds. That is all it was. 3 seconds of silence that told her everything she needed to know and nothing she wanted to hear. Solomon explained, carefully and kindly, that his organization had strict policies around conflicts of interest. That her position as a material witness in the case made things professionally complicated. That he needed to be careful about the appearance of any relationship between them, given her central role in what had been filed. Serena listened. She heard what he was actually saying underneath all the careful professional language. She said, "How long did you know who I was before you approached me at that fundraiser?" The pause this time was longer. He did not answer. He did not have to. The pause was the answer. And Serena sat with the phone against her ear and understood with a precision that felt like ice water exactly what had happened to her. She had been seen and used at the same time. Both of those things were true simultaneously. The cruelest part, and this is the part that I think about, is that the connection was real. She was not wrong about that. Solomon had genuinely felt something for her. The guilt he carried was not performance. It was actual. But real guilt and real feeling had not been enough to make him choose her over the mission. And she had given him everything anyway. The case settled 14 months after it was filed. Raymond did not go to prison. The legal team, and Raymond had very good lawyers, the kind that old money always has on retainer, negotiated a civil settlement. significant financial compensation to the surviving community members and their descendants, a formal written acknowledgement of Gerald Holt's methods and the harm they caused, the transfer of 2 specific properties back to the original communities, land that was now worth considerably more than it had been when it was taken. The settlement cost Raymond approximately a third of the estate. He accepted it without a counteroffer. His lawyer called it damage control. Raymond sat in a conference room and signed his name to documents and said nothing. And then he did something nobody expected. He paid it and kept going. Smaller, quieter, without the weight he had carried for 25 years. Some people said he got off easy. Some people said the families deserved the entire estate and a public apology delivered on national television. Some people said Raymond was as much a victim of his father's choices as anyone. Some people said you do not get to inherit the wealth, enjoy it for decades, and then claim distance from the wrongdoing when someone finally forces the issue. All of those things were true at the same time. That is how these stories actually work in real life. There is no clean verdict. There is no moment where one narrative wins and all the others dissolve. Multiple things are true simultaneously, and everyone has to live inside that complexity. She went back to work full-time. Threw herself into it with the kind of focused intensity that only becomes possible when everything else falls away, and you finally stop spending energy on the performance of a life that was never quite yours. She was good at her work. She had always known that somewhere underneath the marriage, underneath the 16 years of being Raymond's wife at events and dinners and functions, there was a person who could stand completely on her own feet. She stood. The standing was hard, and the nights were long, and there were months where she had to consciously choose to get up each morning and rebuild, instead of sitting inside the wreckage. But she did it. Every single day she chose it. And that kind of choosing is its own kind of power. The version of herself she had believed in with Solomon, the one who was finally seen, finally known, finally chosen. That version took a long time to grieve. Because she had not been entirely wrong. That was the thing she had to learn to hold. The connection had been real, and the manipulation had also been real, and both of those things were true in the same body of experience. She filed for divorce 8 months after moving out. Raymond did not contest it. They met once, in a lawyer's office, civil and quiet, and before they signed the final documents, Raymond said something Serena had not expected. He said, "I am not angry at you." She said, "You should be." He said, "Maybe. But you did in one conversation what I did not have the courage to do in 25 years. You let it out. I just wish it had gone somewhere different." She cried for the first time since everything fell apart. Right there in a lawyer's office with divorce papers on the table between them. Because that was the most honest thing Raymond had ever said to her. The case made his career. His organization was profiled in national publications. He was invited to speak at conferences about reparative justice and historical land rights. He won awards. He thought about Serena more than he expected to. That surprised him. He told himself the outcome justified the method. He told himself that many times. He told himself less and less that he believed it. The families got something back. Not everything. Not what the land would be worth today if it had never been taken. Not the decades of diminished opportunity. Not the futures that had been closed off because the wealth that should have grown across generations never had the chance. But something. Money. Land. A document with the Holt name on it acknowledging that what was taken had been wrong. Elderly men and women who had spent their entire adult lives being told their claim was not worth pursuing, standing in a courthouse and being told, finally formally, that they had been right all along. That part was not nothing. For the people who had waited the longest, that part was everything. This story is not really about a cheating wife. I know that is the headline, I know that is what gets the click, and I am not apologizing for that because this story earns it. But if you've been here with me for the last 40-something minutes, then you already know that the cheating is almost the least interesting part. This story is about what we inherit, not just money. Silence. Complicity. The choice to accept a version of history that benefits you and ask no further questions. Raymond inherited his father's crime and chose to keep it. That choice did not stay buried in the past where he put it. It moved. It spread into his marriage, into the distance between him and Serena, into the quiet desperation that made her ready for someone like Solomon when he arrived. Everything Raymond chose to bury eventually found its way out through the one person he had trusted enough to tell. Serena inherited Raymond's secret and carried it for 9 years. That weight changed her. You cannot carry something like that for 9 years without it reshaping you in ways you cannot entirely see. And when she finally put it down, she put it down badly, through the wrong hands, through a man who had come for it specifically. Solomon inherited the suffering of the families he represented. He carried it into places it did not belong. He used intimacy as a strategy. He got exactly what he came for. And now he lives inside the knowledge of what that cost, not just Serena, but himself. Nobody in this story was only one thing. That is what makes it real. Right now in 2026, this kind of story is everywhere. Generational wealth being examined. Historical land theft coming back into legal conversations. People asking harder questions about how old money was actually made and who paid the price for it. Raymond's story is not unique. There are families sitting on generational wealth right now that was built in ways someone chose not to examine. There are Serenas carrying secrets they were given without being asked. There are Solomons deciding whether the mission justifies the method. The question this story keeps asking is not who was the villain. The question is, what do you do when the truth costs everyone something? Do you hold it forever and let it quietly destroy what it touches? Do you release it and accept that you cannot control the fire? Do you use it and live with what using it makes you? There are no clean answers here. Only choices. And every choice in this story had a consequence that nobody fully predicted. That is real life. That is what we are here for. Before you go, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell for more powerful stories like this. And I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? And what time is it right now? Are you watching from the United States, Canada, South Africa, Australia, Jamaica, the United Kingdom, or somewhere else entirely? Drop it in the comments below. It's always incredible to see how far these stories travel across the world. I'll see you in the next story.